One of the things that has always been called the conspiracy theory is the Great Reset. But you have even leaders not hiding anything. Justin Trudeau calls the Great Reset, they refer to Build Back Better, which is, intrinsically related to the Great Reset. Same with Joe Biden, and on and on.
Hi everyone, this is Veronika Kyrylenko of the New American Magazine. The outbreak of COVID has become a pivotal point that transformed our world virtually overnight. The policies implemented in the name of curbing the spread of the virus had devastating effects. And while the new normal was eagerly accepted by many, it is increasingly rejected by those who still value their freedoms. Today, I'm joined by well-published Catholic and theologian philosopher Dr. Scott Ventureyra of Canada, who just published a book with a telling title, COVID-19, A Dystopian Delusion. Dr. Ventureyra, it is my honor to speak with you today.
Likewise, thanks for the invitation, Veronica. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Please, Doctor, tell us a little bit about your background and your motivation to write this book.
Yes, so I'll just start off with a little bit of information on my education. So originally, I studied economics. I had a bachelor in social sciences and economics, and then I had met somebody that inspired me to study theology. So then I did an undergrad and a master's in that, and then eventually a PhD in theology, which was actually heavily involved in philosophy. And the focus of my academic work has always been in the science and theology interaction. So COVID is very far removed, except for maybe some of the ethical issues. And other areas that I like to publish in are philosophy of religion, philosophy of science, and consciousness studies. I actually presented several times at the Science of Consciousness in Tucson, Arizona, and online as well. And my first book was on the origin of consciousness, which intertwines philosophy, science, and theology. And it focuses on the question of how consciousness may have originated within our cosmos. But however, in 2014, I rededicated myself to the Catholic faith, and my eyes became a little bit unveiled to much of the troubling aspects of our culture, such as the wide acceptance of moral and metaphysical relativism, some of the lunacy behind the transgender ideology, the indoctrination of students from the JK, from junior kindergarten to the PhD level, and the incessant attacks on the unborn, the gradual normalization of pedophilia, the promotion of sexual immorality, and many other issues. And up to that point, my focus was just on the science and theology interaction. And actually, one of the things that made me curious about theology was the question of evolution and origins. So I was always fascinated about the existence of God and questions about origin. And basically, it's the relationship between science and religion. So you could say it was kind of a gradual buildup to these discontents. And it kind of revealed itself gradually. So I started publishing articles and presenting on political and cultural issues. But it's not really where my intellectual interests lie. But for years, I felt compelled to speak up. And so that kind of led me into the COVID-19 situation. So my views, initially kind of evolved in March 2020. Well, we were hearing about it in December, January, end of 2019, beginning of 2020. At first, for the first week or so, I was a little bit afraid. I have to admit that. I didn't know exactly what was happening. I mean, I would hear quote unquote conspiracy theories revolving around, and I kind of dismissed them. So, at the beginning, I started questioning a lot of things because I saw a lot of cover-ups and censorship, lies, manipulations, and fear-mongering. So it all really got to me. I also noticed there was a lot of flip-flops related to the transmission, whether it was asymptomatic or was it solely symptomatic, the flip-flops on wearing masks, watching an interview with Fauci saying that you should only wear masks for psychological purposes. I mean, I was questioning, well, are we supposed to wear the mask? Are we not? Is it to protect yourself? Is it to protect others? So it was all this constant flip-flop. And the topper for me was Dr. Theresa Tam here in Canada, where she said, while having intercourse with your partner, you should wear a mask. And she even said at one point, you should try to stop breathing. So, I mean, these were shocking statements, totally unscientific. And so, I became curious. I started delving a little bit deeper. And I also remember reading a paper in March 2020, which actually argued, I believe it was I'm trying to remember the title of the journal. I think it might have been The Lancet. Mm-hmm. It just escapes me the title of the journal. Oh, maybe it's the New England Medical Journal. And it made the case in early March that SARS-CoV-2 was transmissible through metallic surfaces, and it could rest there for days. And so from my understanding, it wasn't until December 2021 where they publicly admitted that you can't transmit the virus through surfaces. But that was troubling. That actually instilled a little bit of fear within me. But then I started seeing other things. I saw how we have a health minister, the then health minister of Canada, her name was Patty Hadju, and she was calling the use of vitamin D fake news to one of the MPs, the members of parliament, Derek Sloan, who actually was kicked out of the Conservative Party because of some accusations of having ties to Nazis, which is completely unfounded. And so now he actually heads the Ontario Party, which is our only way towards freedom in Ontario. He's a Christian, and he's been very vocal against all the draconian measures in Canada. But so that got my attention. And then also I saw a very interesting documentary. It was by the Epoch Times, and it was called The Origin of the Coronavirus. And so then I discovered the work of Judy Mikovits in this documentary and David Martin. And so it led to other questions. And I saw compelling arguments in this documentary that suggested that SARS-CoV-2 was probably engineered. And that was backed up by my research later on. In the book, I get into the Fauci emails, where he has Dr. Christian Anderson, I believe his name was, saying in a private email, this does not look like it came from any evolutionary process. It looks engineered. And then there was a big cover-up, of course, after that. And I know I also watched a couple of interviews with Brian Rose and David Icke on London Real that were banned immediately off of YouTube. So that got me questioning even more. Well, why are they so afraid from some loony conspiracy theories? I thought, who cares? You can just dismiss them. But they removed David Icke from every platform. And a lot of the things he said were actually vindicated later on, which I found, very troubling, that they would just remove him from every platform. Like they did similar things with Alex Jones in the past, right? And so I started questioning, is this really about our health? Is there something else going on? And then I came across an article in Forbes magazine. It was by Aviva Cox, who is, I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she's a feminist activist. And so she didn't let a good crisis go to waste. So she started with her identity politics and started to say that, certain female leaders were much more proficient and effective in dealing with COVID-19 than male leaders. So she took, something that I thought, is a little bit egregious. It's like to promote identity politics, through trying to argue, oh, they're better at responding to COVID-19. But that led me into something that was interesting, to observe what was happening with Donald Trump and how they were demonizing him on promoting the use of hydroxychloroquine. And then I discovered the work of Didier Raoult, and I discovered the work of Vladimir Zelenko. And so Vladimir Zelenko, he did a little bit, I don't know if I could call it an experiment, but you could say it's sort of an experiment. He treated about just under 2,000 people. I think it was 1,450 people. And the efficacy rate with hydroxychloroquine, with the precise amount of doses, with azithromycin and zinc for several number of days, that had to be very specific in its treatment, had a 99.5% or 99.95% efficacy, or 99.5. In any case, it was very high. And so that got my attention. It also got my attention when they wrote a hit piece about Didier Raoult, who is probably the best published microbiologist in the world. Yeah, I think the title was something akin to "Once a shining scientific superstar, now a conspiracy theorist." And this is just a classic ad hominem attack, right? So it's an easy way to dismiss critics. And so I thought, philosophy, when you see that, you can spot it right away. But I think the common person, when they hear somebody dismisses a conspiracy theorist, they'll ignore them. But of course, that's a fallacy of logic. And it's basically caused by, our impoverished education systems in North America and throughout Europe, especially in North America, I find. Then I came to observe all these retractions from papers. And so then I got even more involved, and I started publishing some blog entries, which got a little bit of attention. And so after experiencing all of this, I reached out to some fellow academics and other thinkers, and I proposed to write a book. And so what had happened was, initially, I wanted to publish the book Making Sense of Nonsense, with all the wide-ranging topics, critiquing our culture and, philosophies of science, like scientism, and combining it with the COVID-19 issues. And so what had happened was I had made a contract with Wittenstock. Maybe I shouldn't have said the name, but in any case, I didn't mention it in the book. So I had a contract. It was the publishing house that I published my original book with. They accepted it. But then as I saw, all the censorship unfolding, so the contract actually started in 2021. And I thought to myself, well, I asked them, have you ever canceled any contracts? Because I was curious. I thought maybe they might cancel this because of the sensitive material. And they said, no, you shouldn't be worried about that at all. And then I thought, how many times has it happened that you cancel the contract? Oh, 2-3 times only. They were because of conspiracy theories. Okay. So then what I did is I sent a chapter from my sister, actually, Valerie Ventureyra. She's a clinical psychologist. She wrote an excellent chapter on mind control in the COVID book. And then after that, I also sent a chapter by another colleague. She's finishing a PhD at University of Ottawa, Martina Speck, who's been very vocal about this. She wrote a very good chapter against the lockdowns, the psychosocial effects of the lockdowns. And so I sent them these 2 chapters, and they responded, oh no, this is questioning the CDC, the NIH. This is conspiratorial. This is not based on science. And I said, well, everything's backed up with references. I mean, Martina had 7 pages of references, like a bibliography of 7 pages, and her paper was 5 pages. So I thought, okay, well, then I thought, well, maybe I'll remove all the COVID material and I'll continue with the other material and I'll publish a separate book. So that's what I thought. And then I said, wait, what about the subject of abortion? What about euthanasia? What about this? What about woke culture? And they said, oh, you're probably better to publish it somewhere else. I said, okay, let's cancel the contract. And so I canceled the contract. And this is actually, a Christian publishing house. So I mean, I'm not shocked because of what I've seen through academia. So I'm not shocked by this at all. But my colleague, Phil Fernandez, he's actually been speaking about the New World Order for decades now. And he was always dismissed as a conspiracy theorist. He's actually quite famous. He's debated some of the most well-known atheists at major universities. But in any case, he said, they rather bend the knee to our culture than to doing what is right. So the purpose of the book, I'll just get into the purpose, was to expose the propaganda which we were incessantly told, like follow the science, trust the science, when in reality, to me, this has nothing to do with actual science. Science is about questioning, science is about dissent. This is what we know from the history of science. Scientists get things wrong all the time. So we're supposed to trust people on this novel SARS-CoV-2 virus, and we know exactly how to handle this. It didn't make any sense. So I wanted to expose that. And, unlike the COVID pseudoscience, the history of science always has welcomed debate. But also, I wanted to expose who was who in the book. So I wanted to talk about who's Robert Malone, who's Peter McCullough, who's David Martin, who's Judy Mikovits, who's Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's Theresa Tam here in Canada? What does she represent? Who's Anthony Fauci? So I wanted to show everybody who is who in this and present actual evidence and arguments to demonstrate, who are actually fighting for what is right. And so I wanted to expose that. And I also wanted to give a bird's eye view of what was happening in Canada. So in Canada, I found that it's kind of become the globalist playground, because you have somebody like Justin Trudeau, who is effectively, in my opinion, I call him this in the book, probably get in trouble, I might get arrested for saying this, but he's Klaus Schwab's pet. He has him on a leash. And so he did something that was so egregious. On February 14th, he enacted what's called the Emergencies Act. And this was the first time it's ever been enacted in history. And so before that, it was called the War Measures Act. And so that was enacted in World War I, World War II, and then I believe in 1970 with his father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who actually enacted it against some terrorist group that I believe kidnapped some diplomats. I believe the name was the FLQ, Front de Libération du Québec. So I think he was actually justified when he enacted it. Some people disagree with that. The NDP party actually went against it at the time, the National Democrat Party in Canada, which is kind of the far left party. It's almost like a communist party here in Canada. We actually do have a communist party itself, but the NDP were against this, and now you had the NDP supporting this. So they formed a coalition to prevent the Conservatives from winning the next election when the leadership is decided. So anyways, so I wanted to expose all these things in the book. And I also wanted to kind of create a repository of information. So the book has over 800 references. And so when I looked at literature, I know there was many, MSN articles, alternative news articles, peer-reviewed articles, podcasts and videos and books, books like The Real Anthony Fauci that focus on particular aspects of the pandemic. So I wanted to give like a wide overview and provide everybody with references so they can investigate for themselves if they're interested. And so that was, what motivated me to publish the book.
Scott, you mentioned the conspiracy theories that you first dismissed, as did so many people around the world, but then you just described how you came to terms that actually they were not really conspiracy theories, but actual conspiracies. And you just mentioned Klaus Schwab, head of the World Economic Forum, and being in control of your government in Canada. And in the preface of your book, you specify that the book focuses on COVID-19 and its connection to the New World Order and the Great Reset. Yeah. So what is the New World Order and the Great Reset, and which essential connections have you discovered between them and the COVID pandemic?
So first, I'll say that the whole pandemic was, as Peter McCullough says, it's about just getting injection into arms. That was the main point of it. And so you have, the key players and the stakeholders like the big pharma, the big tech. The big tech's colluding with the mainstream media, deploying mind control tactics, and the big tech does the censorship. You have the White House, you have Parliament in Canada, the CDC, the FDA, the NIH, Gates Foundation. So all of these, in the WHO, the WEF, all of these are major players, including Communist China, the EU, and Health Canada, and governments across the world. So these are key players that were involved in implementing this, what I call the Great Reset. This is all part of the plan. So one of the things that has always been called the conspiracy theory is the Great Reset. But you have even leaders not hiding anything. Justin Trudeau calls the Great Reset, they refer to Build Back Better, which is, intrinsically related to the Great Reset. Same with Joe Biden, and on and on. So I picked up the book, COVID-19, The Great Reset, and I started examining it. I mean, it's not in your face. Like, so if you read some of the alternative news they misquote things and they take things out of context. But if you actually start to examine the claims, they are quite scary. So, you know, in the book, they state that they want to abolish private property, effectively, not in such explicit terms, but they have 8 predictions of agenda, what they call Agenda 2030, that are referenced in my book as well. And you know, the mantra, you will own nothing and be happy. I mean, so people, when they hear this, do they actually think this is conspiracy? But what happened at the beginning of the pandemic? With the lockdowns, they shut down all the businesses. So they destroyed generational businesses. And what are they doing now? You know, with inflation rates and the rising gas prices. So effectively, this is a concerted effort to attack the middle class and to attack property owners. But so this whole book, The Great Reset, you know, I found it troubling to think, how is it possible that they could actually write such a complex book within 3-4 months? You know, it's published in July 2020. Obviously, it was pre-planned or pre-written. So this is the first thing that I thought. And we've heard on and on, you know, you should never let a good crisis go to waste. They keep saying that. You know, Justin Trudeau says it, and then, you know, my favorite thinker, Yuval Noah Harari, has been stating this as well, on and on and on. So to me, the COVID-19 pandemic was just another rung in the ladder toward this one world governance, which we know as a new world order. So basically, it's like with the new world order, they want to centralize power. You know, right now, what we see with the WHO treaty. So they want to effectively give up national sovereignty over medical and health responses to approaching future pandemics. And right now, if I'm not mistaken, they're currently having meetings in Geneva at the same time as they're having meetings with the WEF in Davos. Mm-hmm. So this, you know, one size fits all approach is going to be absolutely disastrous. But you know, there's people fighting in Canada against this. But this was, you know, one of the main goals, and this is what COVID-19 actually allowed and facilitated, and that was the purpose of it. And you know, it just gets them 1 inch closer to this one world governance. And then I noticed, you know, a lot of troubling things with the vaccine rollout and all the things that are, you know, related to that. I mean, I think it should be obvious to any astute observer, you know, why were they demonizing treatments like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine? If this is about your health and these are working, why are they demonizing them? Why are papers that are basically fraudulent, like in the Lancet, being retracted? You know, they didn't have, you know, they didn't even take into account zinc and the correct amounts of azithromycin and for what periods you should administer these doses and at what stage of COVID-19. So they were completely, you know, sweeping this under the rug. And so this was all part of the plan, you know, I realized. And then now it's like, well, what led next to was the vaccine passports. So then the vaccine passports came out, and now we have the digital ID. And now Canadian airports, and maybe in a number of weeks, will be implementing, you know, this digital ID that can recognize people and know what your status is, your vaccine status. So it's to create this mass global surveillance where all our information is centralized and easily accessible. But obviously, some people think, oh, this might be a good thing. It's like I don't have to carry all these cards around, you know, everything's centralized. But obviously, it's like if you think about it a little bit more deeply, it's like it's a breach of privacy for one, and then security. Hackers can get your information, and there could be identity theft and unwelcome parties knowing about your personal information. So all these things, and I started realizing even more, you know, this is directly tied to the Great Reset and the New World Order. And then I noticed something even more troubling in my home country. What happened with the truckers' convoy, where some of them were punished by imprisonment I mean, we still have one freedom fighter, Pat King, who's still in jail as we speak. I think he was arrested February 22nd. They accuse him of hate speech and all this nonsense, but we don't know the exact reason for why he's still there. And then they started freezing bank accounts. So there was this gentleman I was actually in contact with in LinkedIn, Tom Marazzo. His bank account was frozen. He was one of the leaders. He's never said anything that was out of line. He's very polite, mild-mannered guy, very intelligent. They froze his bank account just for having any involvement. So then I started thinking, well, if they're doing this, is this kind of a prelude of what's in store for us with a social credit scoring system? So all of this is interconnected. I mean, and then you had, other issues that are related. It's like we have political prisoners like Artur Pawlowski. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's a Christian minister. So just seeing how they're just trying to shut up anybody that was dangerous and even throwing them in jail and actually they're incentivizing fellow inmates to attack him. It's frightening that this is happening in Canada. He was in prison for about 55 days. Now he was released a few weeks ago on bail, but there was never a real reason given to why he was in prison. The guards would tell him, I'm not sure, the higher ups know. I don't agree with it, but the higher ups know. So I think it was just a political vendetta. So all this is all linked to one another, and it's just scary. So it's basically a taste of what will come if we don't fight for our freedoms. And just to finish off with the Great Reset. And so there's this idea of stakeholder capitalism with the Great Reset, which to me sounds more like a global socialism. So it's like they have the state controlling and owning the means of production and to what level the economy can reach. And so they control the businesses for their own special interests and their own ends. So, the implications of linking this with the social credit score system is very scary. So say you said the wrong thing on Facebook. Okay, so you're not allowed to go purchase something at a particular store, or we're going to withhold certain amounts of digital coin, which is the next thing that is going to be implemented. Probably digital coins in every nation. But so anyways, this just does not fit in with sovereign nations and with our civil liberties. And so whatever they're trying to do is basically a thing of control. And if you don't fit in their agenda, you're going to be swept aside. And so those are the connections that I saw, and then I try to relate in the book.
Scott, you just quoted Dr. Peter McCullough, who we respect and admire. And he said that the goal was to get a vaccine in every arm. And it's true, the mass vaccination campaign with experimental shots, never before used in humans, was unrolled throughout the world, right? And you do focus on this issue in your book. From chapter 7, you say, one of your co-authors say, a group of psychopaths under the guise of philanthropists have engineered an evil plan of population control by depopulation and sterilization. Please tell us more about this plan.
Okay, yeah, so this chapter was written by my father, who's actually a retired pediatric neurosurgeon. So he's been following all these quote unquote conspiracies for years now. And so he saw this coming quite early as well. I mean, he was on board from the beginning. I mean, we don't agree on every single thing, but for him, he sees that there's an evil plan basically for depopulation. And he kind of relates this to what's inscribed on the Georgia stones. Apparently there's some kind of code that they want to reduce the population to 500 million people on Earth. I haven't verified all this information myself, but there's some connection with this. And then the plan for the remaining survivors is a transhumanist process. So where through neuromodulation, they're going to control their minds and their emotions. And
Sir, I apologize. You in that chapter, your father mentions abnormal magnetic phenomenon observed in the vaccinated. So please tell us about that if you would.
yeah, so he got interested in this group. I think it's a couple of medical doctors in Spain, and it's a group called La Quinta Columna, and they've been doing a lot of research and obtaining samples of, these the Pfizer vaccine in particular, and they discovered nanoparticles like graphene oxide and lipobiospheres and hydrogels. They discovered hydrogels in the, I think maybe in some of the hand sanitizers. Anyways, and they discovered all these nanoparticles in the graphene oxide, which apparently, according to what my father's research, draws a connection with the what he calls the Internet of Things. So it's kind of like I don't know if they're trying to create eventually a super consciousness or something where everything's interconnected. And so it kind of acts like the graphene oxide within biological systems can act as kind of a conductor. And so it could be modulated and regulated through some other central computing system. And so it's also connected to the Starlink, and it'll be under artificial intelligence control. I mean, I haven't really delved deeply into this, but this is what my father discusses. And there's a lot of sources he provides. I believe, I helped him source some of the material. There's about 6 pages or 7 pages of bibliography, which really gets into it. And some of them, there's scientific papers that get into great detail about this. So it's not just some loony conspiracy theory. There's some evidence to back this up.
Perhaps the most important question, Scott, is there a way out of this dystopian delusion? The last chapter of your book is called "Where Do We Go From Here?" So where do we go?
Well, it was interesting, when I think about this. So just yesterday, I read something that Noam Chomsky wrote, and he's a fellow linguist, as from my understanding, that you have a PhD in linguistics. But so, the self-styled anarchist, intellectual Noam Chomsky, he actually seems to realize what is happening. And he said, the lucky ones will die more quickly. And I found that kind of shocking for somebody like Chomsky, who I don't know if he would be on board or not with this sort of thing, but this is his position. And so what we're dealing with here is a subjugation of the human race. And, the key players, Bill Gates and the NIH and Francis Collins and Anthony Fauci and all these organizations, they're guilty of crimes against humanity. I mean, all the cover-ups they've done and all the adverse events that have been hidden from us. I mean, we have more adverse events just for this vaccine in under 2 years than we have for a number of medications and vaccines throughout periods from the 1960s to the present. Anyhow, so I found that interesting that Noam Chomsky seems to be on board. And it kind of reminds me of the lyrics of, to start off kind of on a depressing note, reminds me of the lyrics by a song by King Crimson, Epitaph. It says that knowledge is a deadly friend when no one sets the rules. The fate of all mankind, I fear, is in the hands of fools. So it is indeed in the hands of fools. We have very foolish leaders that are selling out their nations, and then you have foolish people following them. And so to answer the question, where do we go from here? Well, it depends. It depends. I see glimmers of hope. For the first time, I was actually proud to be Canadian in many years when I saw the Freedom Convoy. It was inspiring and inspired people around the world. And, we saw glimpses of a totalitarian government here with the invocation of the Emergencies Act. So then I lost a little bit of hope. But that was more of a signal. The globalists are saying, well, if you want us to, we're going to show you force. They rather let us do it by ourselves. But so I think it depends on what percentage awakes. So, it's kind of like what Matthias Desmond talks about. There's 30% that don't accept the narrative, like us. And then there's the 30% that, religiously almost accept the narrative. And then there's a 40% that it seems like they could go either way. And so the book, for me, is trying to focus on that 40%. the 40% that can shift either way, because a lot of people, they've taken this vaccine because they've been coerced, because they might lose their job, they can't travel, they're either incentivized or coerced. I mean, it's disgusting. I read a while back that the Biden administration was offering a 2-for for people that get vaccinated. I'm like, what a cheap price for health. And here we offer ice cream for children, 5 to 11 for taking potentially deadly vaccine. But so I think it depends on the shift. But yesterday again, I read something that was kind of promising. It was on the Davos meeting, and the CEO, Albert Bourla, who actually said that there's 7 billion doses of the Pfizer vaccine that are stored and not being used. So, wow, that means that a lot of people, it seems, may be waking up. So that this was encouraging to me. And he then said, we need more pockets of educated populations, so basically, we, the uneducated, the masses of uneducated are not taking the vaccines because we don't know what's good for us, right? So we hear this all the time from the media and whatnot. But so I thought that was encouraging, that people are starting to wake up. And although they're covering up the adverse effects, I think that the more people see something's happening to them, the more they're going to resist this. And so there is a hope. And I hope that, people do reject this great reset, and that we can bring eventually through real courts and real judges, we can bring a great reckoning to these evil forces, and eventually maybe have a great takeover where we actually take the globalist elites and all these corrupt politicians, we hold them accountable and take their wealth and redistribute it to other people, as opposed to crushing the middle class and probably burying the poor to have their own playground. So I do see that there's potential for hope, depending on, if we can get maybe, 75% of that 40, we can go to 60% that oppose the narrative. That seems rather hopeful, but that's what I'm hopeful for. And that we follow, at the end of the day, I think, no matter what course of action is taken by people that support the NWO and everybody, I think that we can't fail if we follow love, truth, and God. And if we do that, we can't go wrong at all. And regardless of the consequences, the people that are awoke or awakened must resist such evil. And we can't allow a foot of coercion, and we must fight against it till the very end.
Agreed. Doctor, I would like to thank you for your time and your hard work. Please tell our viewers what's the best way to follow you and how to find your books.
Yes, so my books are being sold on Amazon, so Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, and I have had several people email me personally, which I can be reached through my website at scottventureyra.com, and so I can be sent an email through there, or scott.ventureyra@gmail.com if you prefer a copy sent directly through me. Some people don't want to purchase through Amazon, so understandably so.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Take care.